we already have a problem, and it's actually a shared problem, that our nations have joined together in the Five Eyes Alliance, which effectively, at least, I don't know what else it does, but one of the things it does is it allows the United States, Canada, and the other members to basically reciprocally violate the rights of the citizens of the Five Eyes. In other words, Canada can, the United States government is limited in how much spying it's allowed to do against Americans, but it can contract with Canadians to do the spying and vice versa. And so anyway, we're kind of, we've escaped the bounds that were envisioned by the authors of these documents, including you, I think.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I agree with you 100%. I would even enlarge it. The nation state, as we have understood it, is under vicious attack right now. And I believe, in traveling around the world and being involved in elective office in Canada, that the savior to mankind and being a democratic organization rests on the shoulders of a nation state. What we have started to do in our international agreements, like the EU started it years ago, when then it was economic and then it became political. Thank you for the Brits to get out of that bloody thing. And it was only, I think they had enough DNA left from the Magna Carta to stop doing this. Right? I was the ordinary person in Britain who stopped Brexit from being part of the United Kingdom. It wasn't the leadership. It was the farmer who suddenly realized that Brussels was going to tell him how many bushels of wheat he could grow next year. That's what really triggered what happened in Britain. But in any case, what's happening in the international agreements now, and trade agreements, is that they're infringing upon the sovereignty of the United States of America and the sovereignty of Canada. That's where the line has to be drawn, that you do trade agreements and I'll trade with you and you trade back with me, either by barter or whichever way you want to do it. But when you start to interfere with the individual rights and freedoms and the sovereignty of a nation, that the Parliament of the United States no longer has complete control over all of its activity, that's where I draw the line. And the line has been crossed now. And remember the Pacific Partnership, I think Trump got out of that, and rightly so. And rightly so. That's where every national government should draw the line. Then we'll do trade agreements because, we've traded forever. The Greeks, the Athenians were successful because they they managed to trade with all of their partners in the sea, in the Mediterranean Sea at the time. And so it goes back to the beginning of man. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a trade agreement and still have sovereignty. You can have both. And that's the way it used to be. And now the globalists, starting out of Europe, because they got their European Union still intact in some way or form, even though it's pretty shaky right now, we should not go down that road. The United States should remain a national sovereign nation. Canada should, and we should then cooperate where we can without interfering with our own sovereignty.
I think this is really the best explanation for what we're seeing, is that there is an unnamed, unelected, unaccountable something that finds the sovereignty of our nations distinctly inconvenient and the rights of the citizens to be an ever-present thorn in the side. And it has become impatient, and it used the pandemic. And I must tell you, I do think that this is a very dangerous pathogen, a pathogen whose hazard is greater than one can see in the case fatality rate. And by virtue of the fact that it is actually enhanced over what nature would have delivered. But nonetheless, it used the hazard of that pathogen to get us to unhook provisions of our constitutions that we would never have unhooked under normal circumstances. And, really, this couldn't be more dangerous. We will not get those rights back if we do not defend them vigorously. And those of us who learned about this as it unfolded are behind the eight ball, right? The plan was pretty sophisticated and highly successful before we even knew what we were fighting about. So it is time for us to wake up and defend these documents.
Yeah. And what happens in Canada, and I'm sure it does in the United States, in general jurisprudence, here's what happens. A case comes before the court 3 years from now in Canada if we don't restore our charter and our bill to where it really belongs. Or if we don't restore it and get the courts to say, no, the charter comes first, the charter is in the Constitution. And by the way, we have a thing in our Constitution which says the Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada. It oversees it's above all the other laws. If we don't overturn and have the judiciary reestablished, what will happen 3 years from now or 4 years from now when a citizen of Canada goes to court under their individual rights and freedoms? The judge and the judiciary have the license to say, oh, back in 2022, there was a precedent set. And it's this precedent now that we must go by. And the charter is no more.
Right. But somehow all of the things that made this work, right, are malfunctioning. Right. Yes. So, we literally had the Department of Homeland Security issue a bulletin in which they said that malinformation was a dangerous type of terrorism, and malinformation they defined in their document as based on fact, but causing people to distrust the government, right? So the idea that we cannot discuss facts like the corruption of our government that would cause people to be distrustful of it is a violation of the most basic element of our Constitution.
Couldn't agree
more. As far as I know, the ACLU has not immediately emerged to challenge this.
Yes.
I hope I'm wrong about that, but it may be that the ACLU is preoccupied with the kind of nonsense that it's been advancing in recent years and hasn't noticed this egregious violation of our most basic right.
Exactly. Same kind of thing is happening in Canada. Exactly the same kind of thing. And the edicts come out of the health departments and public health officers, out of some obscure emergency declared, never defined, right? And that's the other thing about it. A lot of this will not pass muster in any reasonable definition of emergency in Canadian law. But yet they've declared it one. And therefore, because they've declared it, it is one without ever defining what the emergency or the pandemic means. And I've said now in my essay, which I'll publish today, for example, there was a professor at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver who, in April 2021, released a report where he reviewed 80 studies from around the world and demonstrated through those studies that the cure was worse than the disease. The way they had approached the cure, it was worse than the disease. And he published that. He could not get any of the mainstream media to carry it. He went on months and months without that being carried by anybody. And now, by the way, his document has been validated over and over again. He was very careful. And he took all of these 80 studies and he used all the different formulas that all of the people like to use to define all of this, okay? Did it properly. And by the way, in that study, which is absolutely damning because the two court cases that I use in my essay to show that they violated, okay, the Constitution, these court cases came out in the late fall of 2021, October and November, when his report came out in April. So how come, and one of the courts was in British Columbia, 2.5, 3 miles as the bird flies from his university. I mean, give me a break. So here you have, and in that report, by the way, he also said that 90 days after the virus was declared back in March of 2020, there were data available, which he produced, which showed that you stay on this present course of that kind of mitigation, and you're going to be in deep, deep trouble. And so he says there was even data available so that the governments in August of 2020 should have changed course as to how they were mitigating this virus, and they did not. And that data was available.
Right. So this is the thing that I think has been driving many of us crazy is that what I noticed, I can't remember the first time it occurred to me, but what we have in the U.S., and I know that you in Canada have a mirror image of it, is bad public health policy that exceeds what incompetence could have generated. In other words, if you look at the policy that we have, it is actually the inverse of the correct thing. It is not. It's not even random. It's far worse than that.
Exactly.
And then you see a cost-benefit analysis like the one you're describing, and there is no interest in looking at it because apparently there is some other priority driving the policy other than the desire to limit the spread of the virus or protect people's health.
And guess what? The headline of his report was just that, cost-benefit analysis.
Cost-benefit analysis. I mean,
that's what the headline. That's what he headlined his report as.
It makes sense. And then, of course, the pattern is just utterly reliable. A cost-benefit analysis suggests there's something wrong with what we're doing, and anybody who points out that that's what a cost-benefit analysis said is then demonized as if they were unpatriotic or uncaring or motivated by greed or who knows.
And guess what? In the interviews that I've done in the last 4 or 5 days, okay, most of them Canadian, okay, by very well-known, smart, informed people. And I've mentioned Professor Douglas Allen of Simon Fraser University. It's the first time they heard of it, even to this day, because, of course, nobody's carried it.
It's a little bit like the protests in Victoria that are happening without any awareness. Yeah, no, it's definitely a bizarre moment, and as much as we were thoroughly warned by Orwell and others, somehow no warning is sufficient until you see it in real time.
No, and I think it speaks to history big time. If you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it, kind of stuff. And we've seen this over the years with the various wars and whatever through all of our history as a species, right? As a Homo sapien or whatever you want to call us. You see it over and over again. That's why Victor David Hanson, by the way, who you might be aware of in the United States, who writes quite prolifically on a lot of things. He's a classic scholar out of California, and but he writes a lot in American Greatness and a couple of other websites. He just did a comparison with the Greeks and what's happening now. And just, we're not learning from history. We're not learning from not only yesterday, but, lots of things which happen. We don't know our history. We don't know, and we're not learning from it. And so we're very, as a Christian would say, we're very fallen angels, aren't we?
Well, I struggle. There's a certain penalty that emerges if you do draw parallels to history, right? You can find yourself in very hot water if you draw these connections. And, it strikes me as an artificially high standard, right? So, okay, we've got these vaccine mandates. It's not exactly Mengele. It's not exactly Tuskegee, right? Those are not perfect parallels. But I guess my point is, at the moment that you find yourself reaching for parallels, and those are your closest examples, you are in very dangerous water. And so I don't know how to make this point, right? Why are we in this section of the library looking for analogies, right? Things are bad at the point that Tuskegee becomes relevant to a active public health program.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And, likewise, the internment of Japanese Americans, right? All of the relevant examples from history are imperfect, but that ought not provide us comfort, because the fact is, they're as close as we've got.
Yeah, but you'd like to think that we learn and that we will not repeat certain decisions which we know were based upon data, regardless of what the nature of that data was, whether it was a virus or something else, that we won't then repeat it because we've had knowledge of how our imperfection in another circumstance worked out. But we don't seem to be able to do a really good job on advancing us. So technically we've advanced ourselves, but I don't know if there's anybody ever come along who has the same impact that Socrates or Plato or Aristotle has had. I mean, where's our Montesquieu? Where's our political philosopher of the 18th century. Where's our John Stuart Mill? I mean, I don't know if there's anybody around. Where's our Francis Bacon? They're not. Where's a Cicero? And so I'm not so sure that on a proper score of globally doing this, that we've advanced all that much as a more well-rounded human being.
Yes, that's true. And the other question is, why do we not have these figures? And in part, it may be because to the extent that they exist, they've been so demonized and driven to the fringe that we're not even aware of them.
Good point.
Which is a tremendous,
good point, which is very sad.
A tremendous danger. All right. Is there anything else you would like to cover before we wrap this up?
No, only that. And I keep arguing, and I know it's a sort of a thing a lot of us say, but civil disobedience is still a very important concept in any sensible democracy, any real democracy. And that's why that thing in Victoria is very important. And I keep saying that if every legislature in Canada, every Saturday, there were 10,000 plus people on an ongoing basis over the next, all through the summer, that I think we could have an impact upon public policy.